We thank the Pakistani presidency for very swiftly reacting to the request from Syria to convene this meeting of the Security Council. The request, which was supported by Algeria and Somalia, has to do with yet another dangerous spiral of tension in the Middle East, and this time this impacts Syria. We would like to thank Khaled Kiali for his briefing. We are very worried by what is happening in Syria. The brotherly people of Syria is something that we are tied to through friendship, cooperation, and our heart goes out to them. The Syrians have deserved a peaceful, calm life without the fear of persecution because they belong to a given ethnic or a faith group. The way to sustainable normalization in Syria is exclusively through an inclusive and Syrian-natured dialogue in line with the Resolution 2254 and through strengthening national reconciliation, ensuring a genuine participation of all political, ethnic, and religious groups without imposing external formula and without excluding from that the representatives of various communities of the multi-religious Syrian society. Syria has always been the home for many peoples and religions, and this is its strength and its historic significance. The international community must help Syrians keep the integrity of this diverse country and ensure its right for a peaceful future. Unfortunately, so far, this process has not become irreversible yet. So today, again, the situation in the Syrian Arab Republic once again is at the core of our importance here after a sharp worsening of the situation in the south, in particular in the Sueda province. Let's set aside for the moment the legitimate action by Israel, which we condemn and to which we will revert, but let me now address the root causes of the current crisis. On the 13th of July, in the south of the country, there were clashes, and initially between the Druze and the Bedouin tribes. After that, the administrative center of the governorship received units that were sent by the Ministry of Defense and Internal Affairs of Syria. As a result of very harsh clashes between the security entities and local armed units, tens of people died, including civilians, representative of ethnic and religious minorities. Hundreds of people were wounded and had to leave their homes in search of safety. What we saw in the mass media and social networks, the footage we saw there show atrocities of armed gangs drunk on their own impunity, attacking defenseless people. This is shocking and recalls the tragic events in the west of Syria, which gave rise to many questions which we still need to receive answers to. The silence of the international community of such a situation is unacceptable. We would like to express our heartfelt condolences to all of the Syrians who suffered from this bloodshed, and we strongly condemn any forms of violence against civilians, regardless of who is perpetrating that or what pretext is being used. It is our view that attempting to attack the life and safety of civilians is unacceptable. We call for an immediate de-escalation, restoring calm, and ensuring unimpeded humanitarian access for all of those in need. As was pointed out by the Secretary General Antonio Guterres, what is happening there is not just clashes, but an open violation of humanitarian norms, which includes extrajudicial killings, acts of interreligious violence, and forced displacement of civilians. Such recurring outbursts of violence do not only underscore the ethnic and religious stability of a future Syria and the trust in transition, but they endanger the very Syrian statehood. It's important to make sure that the UN leadership, including the special envoy, Mr. Peterson, whose staff are on the ground, that they are not afraid of providing a proper assessment of what is happening there. The reference to so-called fight with the remainders of the regime or clashes with pro-Assad elements, which were heard from some representative of Syrian leadership and from abroad, cannot be used as a justification for the prosecution of religious and national minorities or ethnic and religious cleansing. Despite the statements made that a number of bad reputation armed groups were disbanded, in actual fact, many of them remained and became participants in the current escalation. It is particularly worrying to see that amongst the security personnel who are there to ensure the safety of the people, including ethnic and religious minorities' safety, that in those ranks we can see foreign terrorist fighters. There's many and evidence pointing to the fact that they're not citizens of Syria and quite frequently openly associate themselves with ISIL or express sympathy towards ISIL. And this has been shown in open sources of information. We also see that on videos that have been posted by the fighters themselves. In a number of cases, these armed cutthroats openly threaten attacks against Christians, Alawites, the Druze, and the Kurds. It is clear that this is not the kind of foundation on which you can build a viable state respecting the interests of all Syrians. And that is why we think that the current confrontation is not a tragic incident. And the reason here is not just the situation in which the ethnic religious minorities find themselves. We have stated many times that there was a risk in marginalizing whole strata of Syrian society, which was also earlier the case in Iraq, when in the absence of national dialogue and integration mechanisms, state institutions were destroyed and thousands of people, thousands of armed people remained outside state institutions. The campaign to prosecute those who were in favor of the old regime split the Syrian society now the way it split the Iraqi society earlier, but it also creates the conditions for the radicals' revanche. And we can see the consequences of that. We can see spontaneous armed groups who are, again, lording it over people on the streets of Syrian cities and act guided by fear and impunity. Let me recall here that it is imperative to ensure the safety of Russian nationals and facilities in Syria, and we demand that the Syrian authorities undertake appropriate measures here. According to the information we have, the most destructive scenario for Syria's development is something that we managed to avoid. We took note of the announcement made that there was an agreement on a ceasefire and the statement by the leadership of Syria which condemns the human rights violations and the pledge to conduct an investigation of crimes against civilians. What is of principal importance is to make sure that this be followed by specific steps in line with the principle of transparency and accountability, which was what the Secretary General of the UN called for insistently. It's important to make sure also that the Security Council receive information about the outcome and the state of investigation of tragic events in the west of Syria, and that we generally be kept abreast of the steps undertaken by the new authorities to protect the ethnic and religious minorities. Mr. President, we're also very concerned by the fact that these worrying events are also accompanied by the intensification of Israeli Air Force activity in Syria. I am referring to new waves of Israeli airstrikes against Damascus and the southern areas of Syria, which, according to what was said by West Jerusalem, were conducted so as to protect the Syrian Druze. Amongst the entities struck are the buildings belonging to the Ministry of Defense of Syria, including the General Staff Building, which is in the center of the Syrian capital, and the regions which are very close to the presidential palace. There are people who have been killed and many wounded. We have, on many an occasion, provided an assessment to the arbitrary actions by Israel in Syria and condemned them and condemn them now. These attacks are a gross violation of international law, UN Charter, and the Disengagement of Forces Agreement of 1974. Russia has been consistently supporting the sovereignty, independence, unity, and territorial integrity of the Syrian Arab Republic. And this is not just a diplomatic formula. This is a foundation of the future peaceful structure of the country. These principles cannot be traded over or be subject to double standards. We cannot allow a situation where players, external or internal, use a fragile situation in Syria for their own geopolitical purposes, especially through fomenting ethnic and religious tension and undermining the fragile Syrian statehood. And domestic players should not provide causes for this. I thank you.
Thank you, President. I thank you and I thank your team for the swift response to my country's request to convene this emergency session to discuss the consequences of the wanton Israeli aggression on the territory of the Syrian Arab Republic. I also thank the delegation of Algeria and Somalia for supporting our request. I extend my thanks to Mr. Khaled Khayari, ASG, for his briefing. Mr. President, this meeting comes against the backdrop of a serious Israeli escalation manifested in a series of repeated airstrikes on Syrian territories in recent days. It resulted in the martyrdom and injury of several civilians and military personnel and caused severe damage to government facilities. These attacks peaked yesterday, Wednesday, when Israeli occupation forces targeted with the drones and airplanes several official buildings in the heart of the capital, Damascus, including the presidential palace and the staff command building. During rush hour, these attacks resulted in dozens of casualties. The attacks also targeted government headquarters in the governorates of Daraa and Sueda. The Syrian Arab Republic strongly condemns this blatant Israeli aggression, which constitutes a flagrant violation of international law and the UN Charter, and a violation of the sovereignty of a UN member state. Syria categorically rejects the pretext used by the Israeli authorities to justify these acts of aggression. We affirm that such practices are merely an extension of the occupation's systematic policies aimed at undermining Syria's stability and dragging it into conflict. In a recent month, as you all know, Israel has repeatedly violated the 1974 disengagement agreement by crossing the area of separation and through the incursion into areas in the governorates of Quneitra, Daraa, and rural Damascus, committing violations against civilians, establishing illegal military sites, and seizing natural resources. To add insult to injury, these Israeli attacks directly aim at obstructing the efforts of the Syrian state to restore security and stability and to contain internal tensions through a national approach. This was evident in the painful events in the Sueda governorate, where state institutions swiftly responded to tensions. They intervened to de-escalate, to protect civilians and restore order and stability in coordination with local dignitaries. However, Israeli attacks undermined these efforts and worsened the situation, effectively waging an open war on Syria. Despite the gravity of the Israeli attacks, the Syrian leadership acted with utmost wisdom and responded to American, Arab, and Turkish mediation efforts, whom we thank. These efforts helped prevent the region from sliding into an open confrontation. The Syrian leadership made sovereign decisions based on supreme national interests to preserve the country's unity and the safety of its citizens. It also ensured that it is intent on preventing all violations and holding the perpetrators accountable. Syria affirms that it will not hesitate to fulfill its duty towards all its citizens, especially in light of the compounded challenges caused by security chaos and the proliferation of weapons left behind by the former regime. It will pursue its relentless efforts to enforce the rule of law across the entire national territory and to ensure that weapons remain solely in the hands of the state. Syria is resolute in not going backward. The efforts of the Syrian government received support from Syria's regional and international partners who share our concerns regarding combating terrorism, drying up its funding sources, securing borders, and confronting the scourge of arms and drug smuggling that has plagued the Syrian people and the region alike. Mr. President, Syria will remain a state for all its people. This is the source of our national dignity and pride. Syrians are united without discrimination. They are determined to resist any attempt at division or incitement among the factions of the Syrian people. They will not allow any external party to drag them into a war aimed at fragmenting Syria and scattering its efforts. They reject any pretext used by the occupying authorities to wage acts of aggression and violations of international law against their country. My country's delegation affirms that condemning and confronting the Israeli violations is a collective responsibility that lies at the heart of the Council's mandate in accordance with the UN Charter and international law. And I would like to draw the Council's attention to a comment I heard, which is that the Israeli bombardments delayed a visit from the OPCW to Syria. And this is something that harms positive and constructive cooperation between Syria and the organization. Mr. President, while Syria calls on the Security Council and the Secretariat to condemn the Israeli attacks, it also urges the international community to confront this serious threat to international peace and security and to the unity and territorial integrity of the Syrian Arab Republic and to international law and the UN Charter, including relevant resolutions, and namely resolutions 242, 338, and 497. Syria stresses the need for immediate efforts to stop these Israeli attacks and prevent their recurrence, and to compel Israel to withdraw from the areas it has penetrated and end its occupation of the Syrian Golan. Syria has repeatedly reaffirmed that it is aiming at achieving security and stability on its territory and throughout the region, and that it poses no threat to any country in or outside the region. At the same time, Syria has called on all member states to refrain from any actions that would undermine Syria's sovereignty, independence, unity, or territorial integrity, or interfere in its internal affairs and destabilize its security and stability. My country's delegation had refuted in its letter dated the 3rd of March the Israeli claims regarding their defense of a component of the Syrian people, affirming the government's full commitment to protecting all Syrians, preserving national unity, and promoting civil peace. That was in our letter dated the 3rd of March. Mr. President, in conclusion, only the Syrians are concerned with and capable of addressing their internal challenges and strengthening civil peace through a Syrian dialogue, away from destructive foreign interventions aimed at fueling discord and dividing the Syrians. Syrians have always lived together without ever knowing terms like majority or minority. Their religious, ethnic, and cultural diversity has always been a source of pride, helping them to overcome together many hardships and challenges. Today, more than ever, Syrians are united in rejecting Israeli aggression and anything that threatens their country's security and stability. They firmly reject terrorism, hate speech, incitement to violence, and anything that undermines their national unity. Mr. President, Syria, as you have said, needs support. It needs the international community to stand by it. It does not need acts of aggression by the Israeli occupation on any other party. Thank you, President.
Again today, we find ourselves in an urgent meeting of the Council. A serious crisis has been unfolding in Syria over the last couple of months that too many choose to ignore. The systematic prosecution of minorities in Syria and the dangerous consequences that extend far beyond its borders. But unsurprisingly, that is not why the relevant Council members called for this emergency session today. Instead, they convened this meeting in a politically motivated move to condemn the State of Israel while ignoring the brutal massacre being carried out on Syria's people. Mr. President, over the past 6 months, we have witnessed a return of targeted violence against Syria's most vulnerable communities. Mass killings of Alawites in northwestern Syria, entire villages and neighborhoods wiped out. Then brutal aggression against the Kurds in the north. Just last week, the ancient Mar Mikhael church in the southern city of Sueda was razed, burned to the ground. Just days earlier, armed rebels carried out a deadly assault on another church, continuing their campaign of terror and destruction. And in the past few days, we have seen a new wave of violence being unleashed against the Druze community in southern Syria, a region close to Israel's northern border. The images emerging from that area are horrifying. Civilians murdered and slaughtered in cold blood, communities decimated, elders stripped of their humanity and mocked, cultural heritage erased. This is not incidental. Unfortunately, it is emerging as a pattern. It is a persecution carried out in stages by violent mobs, inflamed and directed by organized jihadist militias, who massacre the Druze population and other minorities who simply want to live their lives. This needs to stop now, and those responsible must be held accountable. Mr. President, what else needs to happen before the members of the international community raise their voice and give their attention, this time in the right direction? What more must we see? Another massacre, another village reduced to ashes, another wave of Druze civilians dragged from their homes and publicly humiliated? Mr. President, in the book of Leviticus, God orders, Lo ta'amod al dam re'echa, you shall not stand idly by the bloodshed of your fellow. This is not just our religious obligation, but a moral one. We will not stand idly by as our close brothers and sisters are being slaughtered. This moral obligation is enshrined as formal law in Israel's legal code. And for this very reason, Israel carried out these precise strikes against jihadist militants in southern Syria. Israel's position is clear. We have a commitment to preserve the southwestern region of Syria as a demilitarized area and to prevent the rise of terrorist threats along our border. But we also have an unwavering moral obligation to safeguard the Druze population with whom we share deep historic and national bonds. Their pain is our pain. Their safety is our concern. Just 2.5 months ago, an earlier campaign of violence against the Druze near Damascus was halted because of our actions, both diplomatic and military. And yet here we are again. History has repeated itself in a matter of months. As a result of the actions of Israel this week, a ceasefire was achieved yesterday and the armed forces withdrew to Damascus. Mr. President, let me emphasize, we do not seek to involve ourselves in Syria's internal politics. Our interests are limited, clear, and legitimate. We seek to maintain regional stability on our northern border. We are determined to prevent terrorist infrastructure from taking root close to our borders and wherever terror poses a threat. And we are committed to protecting the lives and dignity of the Druze people in Syria who are targeted simply because of who they are. This is also part of our commitment to the Druze community who live in Israel, who are an integral part of the vibrant Israeli society, including its culture and traditions, who are also significant contributors to the safety and security of the State of Israel. To those who speak of winds of change in the Middle East, the international community must act, not only in statements. The international community must act against the perpetrators behind this violence in Syria and hold them accountable. And the international community must make it clear that the persecution of minorities in Syria will not be tolerated. It is not too late, but the time to speak out and to act is now. Let us hope the ceasefire in the south of Syria holds and that our Druze brothers and sisters get to live in peace and prosperity. Thank you, Mr. President.